You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for August 20th, 2024. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the Cornfield Resistance, where we want to congratulate the DNC Planning Committee for scheduling their Super Blue Convention in the Super Blue City of Chicago during the 2024 Super Blue Moon, starting on the day of our very own Super Blue wedding anniversary. It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal.
Hey, Driftglass. Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary, darling. Happy anniversary +1. We saw middle child back to college today. So
everybody's back to college or off where they need to be. And Junior Dude has moved into his new apartment. So
yeah.
Everything's happening. Yeah.
Well, and I want to take a moment to thank a few people. I want to thank the few haters who mail us and hate the show because we're so biased toward the Dems and we're not fair or balanced at all. So you're like, Professional Left, that's right. Yeah, thanks for noticing, asshole.
How did they figure that out?
All by themselves. They figured out. They're very disappointed. I listened to the first 20 minutes. And it was just terrible. Well, yeah, of course. The first 20 minutes is just awful of this show. We make it that way.
We shill for Trump in the last 5 minutes.
Right. Well, it's
you
like,
have to get all the way through all the liberal stuff first.
It's like putting spices down for them tracking dogs. They hit that pile of pepper and they go arf, 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 and we throw them off the scent. So that's all part of the plan. All part of the plan. So thanks for noticing.
That was pretty funny, getting YouTube commenters who hate us because we're such democratic
liberals. It's like, when there was like last time when we said, when you're here, your family, like, no kidding. It's like, you just really like this Walls guy or something. Like, yeah, we do.
They catch on so fast. They noticed that we're liberal Democrats and we like what's happening to our party. Maybe you should redirect your anger.
Think about your life.
As we have mentioned, yesterday was our 13th wedding anniversary. And thank you all for the hundreds of congratulations that you sent along via email and Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else. We are so appreciative of you. It was a fine day. I got some lovely cards from my husband. That's a tradition that we have. But it was a weird day because we ended the day, of course, with watching the first night of the Democratic National Convention with soaring rhetoric. I got to do silent clapping for AOC. Her speech was, she's just, people on over at Wonkette said, is this 2004 Obama?
Yeah.
And cutting to Jesse Jackson with his, oh, snap. Like his face was just like, wow.
Or was Raphael Warnock 2008?
Yeah, Raphael Warnock was very good too. Took us all to church. Absolutely. So we ended the day with that, but and I gotta say, there wasn't a dry eye in our house with that amazing heartfelt goodbye from Joe Biden. And it's not a goodbye. He's president till January.
He's still president. And you know what? After he leaves office, he's still going to be Joe Biden. So, yeah.
But here's the deal. We began our week. We began Monday, yesterday, by going to a funeral for a very dear friend from church. She was an 88-year-old member who's just one of the social cores of our church.
Yep.
And she and her husband had been happily married for more than 60 years. They met at a missionary wrap-up session, United Methodist Missionaries. She was just so sweet and kind and wise and always had a hug ready for anyone that needed one. She wanted to know all your business.
Mm-hmm.
And if she knew all your business, then she knew somebody who had something in common with you, and she'd want you to meet that person. She was just a connector. And one of these, I've never met a stranger, only a friend I haven't met before. She was just completely social all the time. In fact, she joked with me within the past few months. She had, I don't know whether it was a stroke or it was certainly a situation, a health situation that the ambulance took her to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And she laughed with me later and said, they knew something was wrong because I stopped talking.
Yeah.
And she laughed about that. You know, they knew, everyone around me knew something was wrong because I'd stopped talking. So we had this celebration of life service, and it was packed full of people. And the songs were familiar, and the pastor delivered a eulogy that was, personal. I've been to a funeral this year where the pastor didn't know the person, and it was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the pastor could provide no personal information about this person. This pastor knew this woman intimately, knew her history, knew everything she contributed. She was in the choir. She rang bells. She was part of children's choir, helping them out. Very integrated into the life of our church. And she's going to be missed. I'm going to miss her hugs on Sunday.
Yeah, me too.
So on our way out of the funeral, I met the lady's grandson, adult grandson, and his son and wife mom, in the elevator. And great grandson was a little bit on the spectrum. And I just love kids like that because they're so smart and so delightful. And great grandson said to me, yes, my great grandmother is the one who passed away. And then on the way out the door, he said, she is now with the Walking Dead. Which is kind of accurate, but still.
Yeah.
Also kind of hilarious. And anyway, her legacy is secure. And her family loved her and will remember her forever. And the church will remember her. And I'm so grateful to have known her. And it seems appropriate now to talk about legacies because that's what last night at the convention was about.
It was. Yeah.
How people leave the stage, what they leave behind, how they will be remembered. Are people glad they're gone, relieved, or thrilled, or sad? There's a range of emotions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're pretty sure we know how Joe Biden will be remembered and what his legacy will be.
Yeah.
Because, he put us back on our feet after 4 years of plague, corruption, and racism with Donald Trump. He somehow passed the most progressive agenda in 60 years while facing a Republican opposition that was not just unwilling to work with him, but desperate to destroy him. They also happened to be incredibly incompetent.
Yeah, and terrible people.
And terrible people.
Yeah.
He put NATO back together again.
He did.
Added to NATO. He is a solid pro-labor union man. And I think of all the things that I would add to his legacy or define his legacy with, it would be that he consciously began the hard job of undoing 40 years of trickle-down Reaganomics. He really did kick off the biggest infrastructure program in modern history.
Yeah, he did.
He made Kamala Harris the first woman vice president, the first East Asian Black woman vice president.
Mm-hmm.
And for the good of the country, he gave up power, which is astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Joe Biden has his flaws. He's
Lord
been in public life for 60 years. We all know his mistakes, but no one doubts that he tries hard to do the right thing. So don't be fooled by the hair on fire hysterics of the conservative media or Republican politicians or the complicit mainstream press. They're all having hysterics. Because remember, for them, it doesn't matter. Whichever Democrat is in the White House right now, at that moment is always a communist monster and the worst president ever.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. Whenever any Democrat is elected, that person immediately becomes the worst president in history ever. And suddenly the right and the Beltway media get all gooey for the good old days of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Why can't we go back to the Democratic Party of Bill Clinton?
Yeah, or Barack Obama.
You mean the guy you impeached?
When you hear Newt Gingrich getting all, like, well, we could at least get stuff done. Back when you slandered, attacked, hunted him like an animal, impeached Bill Clinton. And he was that dirty communist, socialist, drug-dealing murderer. Mm-hmm. And the minute you got a new Democratic president, suddenly Barack Obama is a Kenyan usurping monster, and Bill Clinton was a great guy, and why can't we be more bipartisan like that? And
why can't we be bipartisan like Obama?
Well, that whole, when Obama's in office, Clinton's the greatest president in Democratic history. Now that Biden's in office, why can't we be more like Obama? He was so reasonable and so measured and so tempered. And it is the advantage they have. The one advantage the Republican Party has is having a base of completely reprogrammable meatbags who don't remember anything that they're not told on Fox to remember. But all that stuff is just white noise, very, very, very white noise. And it's just transient bullshit. It's just nonsense. Legacy is what lasts. And in the case of Joe Biden, this quote from Hamlet seems very appropriate. Quote, "He was a man, take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again." Now, in a masterpiece of political strategy, Joe Biden took what was a tremendous disadvantage and turned it into a huge advantage, using jujitsu on the Republican Party. He is leaving behind a unified, enthusiastic political party that is focused and energized and ready to go to work for Kamala Harris today. While at the same time, he completely fried the circuits of the Beltway media, which had already written his political obituary. It was all over about the shouting, folks. And at the same time, he gutted the Republican Party, which still can't figure out what the hell to do about their two creepy people at the top of their ticket, given this completely different campaign they now have to run. Now, it is far too, let's say, conspiratorial to suggest that he lured them and baited them into going all in on an old man Joe's lost it message, and then he just yanked the rug out from underneath him once it was too late to change. Once they'd committed to that strategy and there was no turning back, suddenly there's no Joe Biden to fight against anymore. But on the other hand, remember, this is the same guy who baited the entire Republican Party into demanding that people keep their hands off Social Security and Medicare on television in front of millions and millions of witnesses. Got them all to stand up and cheer. So, that's a hell of a legacy. On the other hand, let's talk a little bit about the legacy of the legacy media and the kind of history they're making for themselves today.
Yeah, because it's a massive fail.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of the best convention speeches we saw wasn't at the convention. It was delivered by Frances Callier and Angela V. Shelton, also known as Frangela. And we watched them pay-per-view on the Sexy Liberal Tour in Chicago a couple of nights ago. They could have swapped out that spoonful of anti-labor buzzkill mayonnaise Chris Coons for Frangela, as far as I was concerned. And, last night would have been measurably improved. I couldn't believe they followed Take Them to Church Raphael Warnock with Chris Coons.
Right. Everybody sit down and stop feeling enthusiastic. Chris Coons is talking.
Chris Coons is coming out.
Great.
But like the Lannisters on Game of Thrones, Joe Biden always pays his political debts.
Yes, he does.
So Chris Coons from Delaware got that spot to come out and introduce Jill, who introduced their daughter, Ashley, who introduced her dad.
Yeah.
But back to Frangela. Frangela had a lot of very important things to say.
Yes.
And they were also funny while they were saying it.
They were the funniest thing on that show.
They really were.
By a head and shoulders.
I thought Hal Sparks was very funny and very professional in terms of being a professional comedian. And then Frangela was absolutely saying important things in a funny way. Now, Frangela said they had heard of white mothers preparing a whole beautiful, nice meal for their kids and cooking all day. And their kids coming home and saying, well, I don't want that. So the white moms would make another whole meal just to suit their little brats. And then Frangela said, that never happens in our family.
No.
You never ask a question like, what's for dinner? Because whatever mom made is what's for dinner. And what's for dinner now? Kamala is for dinner. That's what we're having. So quit your whining.
Yeah.
If you're whining about it being Kamala for dinner, nobody's going to make you another meal.
I know why can't
the Democratic Party is having Kamala.
Why can't Liz Cheney be the vice president? Why? Why? Shut up, Bill Kristol. Shut up and go back in your hole for a decade.
Another thing that their mothers never let them forget was how we, as a family, behave in public.
Yeah, there's a public behavior and a private behavior.
Yeah, and this was so familiar to Driftglass and I because it was the same with our mothers.
100%.
Which is it is a we don't behave that way. And there's just this standard for family behavior that applies to everyone.
The minute you step out the
door. You
are
out in public, you are a reflection on your mother, and your mother is a reflection on you. And that's the way it is. We don't do that, is how that comes out. And Frangela said, I know I stabbed your dad last night. We don't talk about that in church, which is just so funny. But this was a funny, ribald criticism of all of the people doing New York Times op-eds and telling the Democratic Party what they needed to do about Joe Biden in public.
That's right.
And this is when they went to a place that the DNC definitely didn't want to have anything to do with, taking to task all the panicky white boys who used their celebrity to grab a guest editorial in the New York Times, which was all too eager to publish anyone who wanted to publicly push Joe Biden aside and have an open free-for-all at the convention, skipping over Kamala Harris, which Frangela had absolutely no time for.
No. Well, to remind us that this is not Barack Obama.
Yes,
this is Kamala Harris.
This is
Kamala
Kamala
There's a whole
Harris.
different energy now. Barack Obama, lovely man, calm and even-tempered, but this is a whole different thing now that you don't want to fuck with.
Yep. And all the other panicky white boys who have always resented Joe Biden and who use their podcasts and op-ed pages to demand Joe Biden step aside right now, right this minute, so we could have an exciting open convention? Really? And you turned to me during that moment in their monologue and said, George Clooney, you are a guest at this barbecue.
That's right. You sit over there, okay? I'll bring you a plate. But if you don't want to be kicked out of here right now, you will shut your mouth, compliment the cook, and have a great time and talk about sports. That'd be great if you could do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now we get to the core of our show today. Just 1 month ago, after calling for Biden to step aside immediately, this is what Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, the New York fucking Times, insisted that the Democrats needed. Quote, really, what the Democrats need is a thrilling open convention rather than a coronation. Trump just had one of those after all, unquote. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that bitch.
Yeah.
Maureen Dowd, a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, because we here at the Professional Left, we put in the work. We're also Science Fiction University. We put in the science fiction work, and we took a good long look down that other timeline. And that's the timeline where all the panicky white boys and the desperate for Dems in disarray media and Maureen Dowd all got exactly what they wanted. And you know what we saw instead of a unified, well-ordered, enthusiastic convention?
Welcome to another edition of Thunderdome!
That's what they wanted. But that's not what the base of the Democratic Party wanted. You know, the actual Democratic Party, which is why all the whining and griping and why isn't Liz Cheney speaking tonight nonsense on social media was only coming from the same clowns who whine and nitpick every fucking thing anyway. This is from Comrade Marcos, Commander Marcos Militsas, quote, we would still be in an all-out civil war at the convention fighting for multiple candidates, emerging shattered and the losers bitter and angry with less than 80 days to bring everyone together, unquote. And this is from friend Jeff Jarvis on social media. Quote, just imagine if today we had no Democratic presidential nominee, let alone vice presidential, if the Times, the Post, Ezra Klein, and Nancy Pelosi had their way. Let us be grateful to Joe for one more thing, outmaneuvering all of them for the good of the Democrats and democracy, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi looked perfectly happy last night.
Yeah.
So, who knows exactly what happened, but I think a unified Democratic Party is something Nancy Pelosi is appreciative of.
And if you listen to Joe Biden's speech, that's what he delivered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely delivered.
Now, we got to talk for a minute about the protesters at the DNC that were just sad. They seemed to be from Central Casting. The media was drooling over 1968 redo, with Dan Rather getting beaten on the floor of the convention, 1 million anti-war demonstrators chanting, "The whole world's watching," a thug mayor promising to shoot demonstrators, a police riot in Grant Park with billy club wielding cops beating protesters, tossing them through plate glass windows on Michigan Avenue while J.B. Pritzker laughs. Tear gas wafting into the night sky strong enough to make the Democratic nominee weep as they watched them away from the balcony of their hotel suite.
Just like Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah. No.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they got the island of misfit toys marching around waving their abandoned Kamala signs, led by Cornel West, who has let his giant ego all the way out of the box and who looks stunned that his tens of millions of imaginary supporters were not there.
Where did they go?
So there was no Abby Hoffman, but Driftglass Vermin Supreme and his head boot showed up. They had that going for him.
Of course he did. If I had his shtick, I'd show up there too. Of course.
Yeah, Vermin Supreme should show up.
Mm-hmm.
For on the scene reporting, we now turn to friend of the pod, Rick Perlstein. Quote, "I'm at the Palestine rally for the DNC, 1,000 people, maybe two. The same boring rights and yak as every radical demo ever. Ridiculous that anyone on either side of the election could perceive threat in this. Could actually be powerful and effective if it were a disciplined, silent vigil with signs, with images of what's happening, instead of a dozen simultaneous stupid chants and people holding up signs for their tiny Marxist sect. It was nothing for normies, nothing appealing to conscience," unquote.
Honestly.
And I gotta say, everybody having their own Instagram is the problem.
Yeah. Well, and the anti-war movement had a united, respectable, broad front.
Right.
And conjoined with a civil rights movement full of pastors and rabbis and brilliant public speakers and so forth.
And normies were getting drafted to go to NAM.
Right.
So there was unified resistance. Absolutely.
Once the draft kicked in and then my son could go, then suddenly a whole lot of middle-class families started getting real interested in how that war was going. And you mean there's a war in Vietnam? Why didn't I hear about this? So I completely understand, and I don't doubt the sincerity of the protesters, but Jesus Christ, they're just sad. They really are. Like, the Democratic National Committee couldn't have scripted a more alienating bunch of goofballs to make the cameras want to look away and make people go, no. I'm going back and talking to anybody at the convention, because there was a whole bunch of middle-class people from all over the country in there chanting USA. That's a very interesting story. Now, the Harris Walz campaign and the Democratic National Convention is not giving the media the story the media wanted to tell. Instead, Democrats are saying no to them, weirdly enough, saying no, fuck you, no. And this is making them very, very angry. So the question is, what is the legacy of the legacy media? What is our fourth estate leaving behind? Well, you have probably noticed the decline in the media has almost exactly paralleled the collapse of the Republican Party over the last 30, 40 years. I used to describe it on my blog as this incestuous relationship between two drunks leaning against each other for support, but it's actually much worse than that. They are two pretty big, powerful institutions bound together by the chains they themselves forged. drowning in a cesspool of depravity and privilege and bullshit they themselves created. And the only problem is they're dragging the rest of us behind them into the pool.
Mm-hmm.
But this shit pile is still a hierarchy. There's still a pecking order here. And there's an aristocracy. And near the top of this shit pile is the New York fucking Times. And near the top of the New York fucking Times is an ancient, joyless husk named Maureen Dowd. Now, over the last few days, everyone has dunked on Maureen Dowd. And if you don't know why, let me explain.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Exactly 1 month ago, this was the headline of Maureen Dowd's column in the New York fucking Times. Quote, Lord Almighty, Joe, let it go. Unquote. And then she goes on this meandering wander down memory lane, something about Rehoboth Beach and French fries and the good old days and sand between her toes. But then, suddenly, quote, but now my gladdening images have been replaced by maddening one. President Biden, hunkered down in his house there, recovering from COVID, resisting talking to anyone who will tell him the truth, hoarsely yelling, get off my beach, at the growing list of Democratic lawmakers and donors trying to warn him that he's pulling down his party and the country. It makes me sad that Biden doesn't see what's inescapable. If he doesn't walk away gracefully right now, he will likely go down as a pariah and ruin his legacy. The race for the Oval Office today is between two delusional, selfish, stubborn old guys. And that's a depressing state of affairs. I don't know about you, Blue Gal, but the Joe Biden I saw last night is not delusional. He's not selfish. He's not stubborn. But Maureen Dowd is a King Kong bitch. And she always has been. Because further down the page, there's this. Keep it in mind. Now, keep this quote in mind as we go on. Quote, but Republicans are nervous about a Dem ticket swap. Tom Cotton posted that it would be a coup, unquote. And finally, this, quote, really what the Democrats need is a thrilling open convention rather than a coronation. Trump just had one of those after all, unquote. No, Maureen, what Democrats didn't need at all was a thrilling open convention. That's what you needed. Some Democrats in disarray chaos to reanimate her dead heart.
But she didn't get it.
No, she didn't.
So less than a month later, I mean less than 30 days later, this was her column's headline. And I have to tell you, we did the New York Times crossword puzzle with my dad on Sunday. And then I came across this on my iPad. And I looked at Drift Class and I said, I need you to take a really deep breath before I show you Maureen Dowd's headline. And so you did. I said, are you ready? And I flipped it over and it read, the Dems are delighted, but a coup is still a coup.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's just pissing on January 6th victims, people who died or were injured on January 6th. To call this a coup.
And that's pissing on her own column from 30 days prior.
30 days ago, yes.
As if it never happened.
Right. But, you know, hell hath no fury like Maureen Dowd every day. So here's what she wrote, quote, it's going to be a glorious coronation, except that everyone's mad at one another. What? Top Democrats are bristling with resentments, even as they are about to try to put on a united front at the United Center in the Windy City,
really?
Unquote. Now, a month ago, calling it a coup was only something a scumbag like Tom Cotton would try.
Mm-hmm.
A month later, it's in her own fucking New York Times headline.
Yeah.
And whatever bitter, whispering leakers Dowd is listening to, or maybe she's making them up, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There is clearly not some secret civil war going on.
No.
That was clearly evident last night.
I wonder if she and Peggy Noonan just go on drinking binges together.
Maybe.
Because they certainly seemed like the same person at this point.
Are there some resentful assholes out there? Of course there are. There are huge egos in that room. Mm-hmm. There always are. This is politics. This is from Kyle Griffin, executive producer of The Weekend on MSNBC. Quote, a former top Obama White House official, now we got to figure it's David Axelrod or one of the Pod Save lads, because who else would it be?
Right.
Ran into Mike Barnacle and said, Isn't it great that fucking guy finally figured out he had to quit? Barnacle was tired and wasn't having it. What guy? He replied. Joe Biden, the West Wing alumnus replied. You know something? Fuck you, Barnacle replied, and fuck all your friends with their anonymous quotes in the papers. Put your name on it next time. And he kept walking. A source familiar with Biden's reaction to the story, he might still be laughing, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And what did Athena say about this story?
Oh, yeah. She said 2 rules. Number 1, A, fuck Mike Barnacle always. B, except this one time. 100%. 100% right.
Well, I'm sure one of the reasons Joe Biden is still laughing is it's Mike Barnacle.
It's Mike Barnacle.
You know,
but really, he got his Irish up, and you could feel his Irish getting up.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The snarking of anonymous assholes will always find its way to someone like Maureen Dowd. And, you know, because they know she'll print it if it's anti-Democratic Party.
Sure.
She'll spread it far and wide with a smile. She's been this way for decades. As far as science can tell from core samples, she's hated every Democrat since Harry Truman.
Yeah. Yeah. Since before she was born, she hated Democrats. Remember her hot take on Al Gore literally a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago. Quote, Al Gore is so feminized and diversified and ecologically correct, he's practically lactating, unquote. This is from the Educated Imagination blog in May of 2010. This is 14 years ago. Quote, what's wrong with the New York Times? Yeah, the eternal question. Oh, Bambi. That's Maureen Dowd's nickname for Obama, which she employed right through the primaries until his nomination in 2008. The problem with it? Well, it, of course, has nothing to do with anyone recognizable as Barack Obama, a remarkably capable politician who, by the time he denounced his candidacy, had already made a career of overseeing the self-destruction of his opponents. But Dowd pushed the Obambi conceit for almost 2 years because she could.
Mm-hmm.
As is regularly the case, she lacked the discipline to weigh whether or not she should. This, remember, is the same person who, during the 2000 election, gleefully perpetuated the fiction that Al Gore claimed to have invented the internet and suggested that he's so feminized that he's practically lactating. And that's a pattern of behavior with Dowd which is disturbing for at least a couple of reasons. The first is that she never lets a fact get in the way of a low blow she regards as clever. And the second is that she has an unmistakable tendency to feminize males in order to dismiss them. And a brief aside, I'm firmly convinced she hated Bill Clinton because he wouldn't hit on her or sleep with her. Because that was, what? I'm showing you almost my entire ass, Mr. Clinton. And moreover, does so almost exclusively with Democrats, calling them the mommy party. You can guess who the daddy party is. She likewise occasionally masculinizes women for the same purpose, most especially Hillary Clinton, or Hillzilla, as Dowd dubbed her during the primaries. Gender stereotyping is one of a number of strategies that Dowd regularly resorts to in place of anything that might be characterized as responsible criticism. Here are some notable examples of Dowd's efforts to emasculate Obama, because girly men are, you know, self-evidently a joke that everyone gets. Here are the quotes. Diffident debutante, America's pretty boy, effete, emotionally delicate, weak sister, legally blonde. Ask yourself, does any of this even remotely coincide with your estimations of the man, however you feel about his politics?
It's also fucking racist.
Oh, yeah. No, she's horrible. She's horrible. And finishing the quote, and why diminish him with feminine comparisons? What's going on here? Unquote.
So that's from 14 years ago.
Yeah. And 14 years later, people are still asking what's going on here, even louder. And you know what? Don't expect any answers anytime soon. Because, like the rest of the geriatric aristocrats sitting atop the media shit pile, no one can force Maureen Dowd to leave. She is 72 years old, and she is an institution. She will never bow out voluntarily, and since the 1986 modification of the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, age-based hiring discrimination and mandatory retirement age have, with a few exceptions, been phased out. So theoretically, as long as Maureen Dowd can do the job is hers. So we are left to ask ourselves, what is Maureen Dowd's job? And is she still doing it?
Yep.
Well, based on a quarter century of evidence, Maureen Dowd's job is lobbing verbal cinder blocks from her very high place into traffic and watching people scramble. And after showing the world a quarter of a century of cask strength bile directed at every Democrat who crosses her field of vision, who can doubt that she loves the act of venomous hatred? She doesn't know or care who it hurts because all those little people way down there aren't her concern. None of what she does will ever affect her personally, and bonus, her crazy, shitty takes regularly translate into lots of angry reactions from pissed off liberals on social media. And at the New York Times, all engagement is good engagement.
Right. Leave a comment below if you hate Maureen Dowd.
Yeah. Well, if you really hate her, subscribe. What's she going to get up to next? Oh, you'll never guess.
And that will be the Times legacy.
Yep.
That, in exchange for eyeballs and clicks, the Times let ghouls and grifters like Dowd gobble up all the goodwill the Times investigative reporting and book review section and magazine had earned them, leaving nothing behind but a gossip rag that no decent person would have in their house, because, as my grandmother would say, it befouls the air. There is also a very real and very toxic knock-on effect of the Times allowing garbage people like Maureen Dowd to use their megaphone to spread their venom, because you could just quote the New York Times.
Right.
Here's an exchange between John Roberts and Chris Coons on Fox News. John Roberts, employee at Fox.
Mm-hmm.
A coup is still a coup. And Chris Coons said, that is literally ridiculous. Roberts, well, you tell that to Maureen Dowd because those are the words that she used. And Coons said, I will. The one attempted coup that happened in my lifetime was January 6th.
Yeah. But Maureen Dowd said it. I didn't say it. Maureen Dowd said it. Maybe you should go debate Maureen Dowd. Liberal Maureen Dowd.
Liberal Maureen Dowd and the liberal New York Times said it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That leads us to our last topic for today, how the legacy media helps legitimize conservative propaganda. And if you were paying attention over the last few days, you could see it happening in real time right out in the open.
Yep.
When David Axelrod shows up for work at CNN and sounds off that if the election were held today, Trump would win. Where do you suppose that quote showed up almost immediately? At the right-wing dregs at Town Hall. Quote, this is townhall.com, quote, as the DNC begins, Dems aren't going to like what David Axelrod just said about Kamala.
Oh, no, David Axelrod. Didn't he work for Barack Obama? Isn't he a liberal,
right.
Blue Gal? Yeah.
Continuing with the article, as the 2024 Democratic National Convention kicks off, former Obama advisor David Axelrod has been more measured regarding Kamala fever. He understands that national elections are about who can get to 270 votes. As of now, Trump has the better pathway. If Kamala keeps talking about price controls and how her agenda will pay for itself, which is a classic snake oil salesman pitch, she will get annihilated at the debate, unquote.
Yeah. And that thing there about Kamala Harris and price controls, that is this week's premier example of legacy media feeding ammunition to the conservative propagandists.
Mm-hmm.
Because after weeks of the media complaining that Harris wasn't being specific enough, boo-hoo, and then she won't interview with us, boo-hoo.
We need more policy. Yes.
And every time every time you go up and ask her a question, or she comes up to you and says, "What do you got?" All you're asking her about is, "Well, Donald Trump said this. What do you think? Donald Trump said that. What do you think?" Fuck you. Well, after all that, the same legacy media was just wound up and ready to pounce on anything they could exaggerate into a scandal. Now, first out of the gate was Washington Post employee Catherine Rampell, who all but called Kamala Harris a communist and who was just plain dead wrong about saying Kamala Harris would endorse price controls. Now, did she correct herself? Did she apologize? Did she say, really, I'm sorry, I goofed? Of course not. She just went on to accuse Kamala Harris of silliness, like you do. Enter Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman. Did I mention that he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Blue Gal? Yeah. He jumped into the middle of this to set the record straight about what Kamala Harris is and is not proposing. Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist. Quote, kind of amazing how much the commentariat went into a tizzy over Harris calling for price controls when she did no such thing. And bear in mind that most states, including Texas, already have laws against price gouging, unquote. So that would settle it, right? It's debate over. We're done. The Nobel Prize economy guy has weighed in. Of course not. On Friday, Paul Krugman's New York Times colleague David Brooks, you might have heard of him, who was hungry for anything to tag the Harris campaign with, picked up that ball and ran with it on the very legitimate, very sober, fact-based PBS NewsHour. This is David Brooks. Excuse me. Quote, but the price gouging is just, well, Catherine Rampell, the Washington Post columnist and a NewsHour contributor, says it's impossible to exaggerate how bad this policy is. And I agree with that. And Catherine had a good line that if your opponent is calling you a communist, maybe don't lead with price controls. And price controls just create shortages, and they create black markets. We've seen this happen in Venezuela. We've seen it happen in the Soviet Union. Price controls just don't work. What's worse about that? First, it's trying to address a problem that doesn't exist. Grocery prices, inflation has been less than 1% for the past year. It's over.
You mean David Brooks is admitting that Joe Biden reduced inflation?
He's admitting no such thing. He's saying Kamala Harris is a communist, honey. Please pay attention and quit remembering things that are very inconvenient. David Brooks continues, it's over. We had a surge, but it's over. The problem does not exist, unquote.
Somebody ought to tell Donald Trump that. David Brooks, conservative columnist of the New York Times, says inflation is over.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Is that the end of it? David Brooks saying inflation is over? By the way, his real estate investment trust just appeared on the screen.
Yeah.
Is that the end of it? Of course not.
No.
Because then CNN invites Catherine Rampell on to elaborate in even scarier terms for anyone who doesn't read the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, we've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before. Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc. Wasn't that just what David Brooks said?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what he said.
This is a call and response.
Well, but it's important that you have PBS, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these respectable legacy medias put the words Kamala Harris and Soviet Union and communist together in a bundle that can be then handed off to guess who?
Right. And now that Kamala the communist has been legitimized by 3 different respectable legacy media sources, it's off to the fucking races, right? That's it. Right-wing clown Chris Stigl said, quote, how bad is Kamala Harris's economic pitch today? Listen to the Washington Post reporter on CNN. I said, Washington Post reporter on CNN, unquote. The New York Post, quote, left-wing Washington Post slams Harris price gouging crackdown plan, unquote. Also in the Rupert Murdoch New York Post, which will be read on Fox and Friends tomorrow morning.
Absolutely.
As a completely separate source, quote, communism, spelled K-A-M. Harris unveils budget-breaking $1.7 trillion economic plan that includes government price controls.
Oh, no.
Unquote. Then we move on to Newsbusters, who spins it this way. Quote, David Brooks tells PBS that he is surprised a responsible Democratic candidate would endorse Soviet-like price controls. Maybe she isn't so responsible then.
Makes you think.
Unquote.
Doesn't it make you think? I know I listen to Newsbusters when I want to think about things. Think about them a lot. Think about real hard.
I listen to Eric Erickson.
Oh, what do you say?
Quote, even the media can't spin Kamala's price control plan.
Damn, it's that bad. Even the media can't spin it. God damn.
He's talking about investigating price gouging and enforcing the law.
At the corporate level. Yeah. Way up high, where the brand managers live.
Yeah. But that will affect the stock prices for David Brooks and Eric Erickson and their stock holdings. Kyle Becker, former assistant producer on Fox News, quote, New York Times writer is astounded Kamala Harris would come out with Soviet-style price controls.
Yeah.
Again, it's just a humongous circle jerk. And finally, there's some asshole named Bill Griffith, quote, boy, when the liberal New York Times ultra-liberal columnist David Brooks...
He said liberal twice, so it must be true.
It must be true that David Brooks is a liberal.
Ultra-liberal.
Ultra-liberal.
I see him at all the meetings.
Speaks so strongly against the Dems candidate. She must be really bad. Even Brooks knows Kamalidia is a communist.
Yeah.
Unquote.
That's how it works. That's how the process, that's how the machine works.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you have conservatives stuck inside legacy media, so they can do this shit. So they can make things up for their partners over on Fox News and Newsbusters.
A Washington Post columnist who's on CNN and a New York Times columnist who's on PBS.
Right.
So it's all got to be true.
Mm-hmm. And I've documented this a million times on my own blog of some right-wing person who's now a never-Trumper gets a hold of some dumb fragment of a sentence that they picked up off of Fox News and goes off on a tirade about how Democrats fuck up. Then you go investigate the actual quote, and they find out they said nothing of the kind. It took one little quote, but it triggers all the assholes who have wiring in their head that knows that Democrats are just terrible communists in waiting and gives them whatever they want. Now, for the record, this was me on social media predicting what was about to happen. Quote, this is how Beltway media manufactures issues. WAPO spouts it, New York Times employee polishes it, and Fox swings into action with even the liberal New York Times. That was me before all this jumped off, because every one of us, all of you people listening out there, I'm sure knows how this shit works now. Knows exactly how this shit works. Now, we've been going on...
I just want to say that on Thursday's show, we're going to talk about the Bulwark and Tim Miller.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So tune in.
Tune in.
Subscribe. Just like Maureen Dowd.
Comment below.
Yeah. Just like Maureen Dowd. Who knows what wacky shit we're going to talk about? You should subscribe for the next episode of the Professional Love Podcast. Now, there will be
Who knew we were liberal Democrats, Drift Glass?
Who knew? I got halfway into your show. I've listened to 500 episodes, and I still discovered you're a bunch of liberals. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Now, there will be no news roundup today. That's on Thursday. We're going to do a big news roundup on Thursday because there's a lot of news, but it's mostly convention stuff. However, there was one story in the news that made us laugh very, very hard.
I laughed so hard my stomach hurt from laughing.
Yeah. And it's half great news and progressive and half, oh shit, you're kidding me. This is from The Hollywood Reporter, who we usually don't read, but it was directed to us and we appreciate that. The headline is, Crooked Media Union members unanimously ratify contract with wage increases and AI protection. So far, so good, right? That's a good thing. Unions.
We love unions. We're grateful when contracts get worked out. Yep.
Yeah. Quote, the 61-member unit of Crooked Media, which produces podcasts, including Pod Save America, ratified the agreement after more than a year of negotiations and a one-day walkout. It's all good. That's great. This is how this is supposed to work. Members of the Crooked Media Union unanimously ratified their first collective bargaining agreement, gaining provisions including minimum starting salaries of $80,000. Each. For 1 year. That's a year. That's a minimum. That's minimum wage.
That's one person making $80,000 per year. For podcasting.
Yes. But wait, there's more. Starting salaries of $80,000. Again, minimum starting salary, $80,000. AI protections, which makes sense. That's your intellectual property. And a minimum of how many paid days off, Blue Gal, do you suppose?
When you read this to me, I guessed 18 to 20 days off a year.
49 days of paid off time per year. 49 days of paid off time per year.
7 weeks vacation.
Yeah, paid vacation, where you can spend your $80,000 however you want. Now, I'm not saying they don't work hard. I'm not saying that they don't labor under incredibly intense circumstances.
And good for their union getting that.
Sure. Now, let me read the rest of this, and the last sentence is the one that made me laugh. The 61-member unit of Crooked Media, which produces podcasts including Pod Save America and Love It or Leave It, ratified the agreement after more than a year of negotiations and a one-day walkout on August 5th. Ahead of the walkout, Crooked Media workers said they hoped the negotiating terms would set the standards for other podcasting companies moving forward. Unquote. So, Blue Gal, looks like you and I are going to have to go talk to professional management about our salary situation. Because between us, we don't come close to $80,000 a year. And what's our paid day off policy again? I forget.
No, that's the part that gets me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I did appreciate, however, our listener, longtime listener, Kevin Holtzinger, remembering that you and I podcasted on our wedding day.
Yes, we did.
Because it was a Friday, and that was podcast day.
That's podcast day.
So we're going to have a podcast out, even though we're getting married this afternoon.
Yeah. Yep. And we've been doing this 14 years now.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've missed a week.
We don't miss
ever.
too often.
Yeah.
We do. And someone wrote to me, I think they sent me a DM and said, you can take a week off from time to time. And I was like, yeah, we can.
We can.
And we probably will.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 7 weeks off a year is pretty amazing.
Well, and it's the abyss between the mom and pop out in the cornfield liberal podcast that's been cranking along for 14 years and the podcasting corporations that live on the coasts and have a lot more revenue than we do. They have Soros money, that have venture capitalists just dumping money into them. And you have unions who are looking at like John Lovett or John Favreau and their giant new houses and their celebrity friends going, hey, how we're doing a lot of work here. How about a piece of that for us? And the piece you can break off for people minimally is $80,000 a year. Now that's also a function of locating your headquarters on the coasts, where life is very, very much more expensive than in Springfield. I would settle for half that in cash and maybe just only 40 paid off days a year. That'd be great. So we're saying the unions did a great job. They negotiated well, but please understand when you're listening to podcasts, the just chasm between what we do here in our home with our donated microphones and our laptops and our core of dedicated and wonderful listeners and these corporations.
And years of experience in blogging. We always say to new podcasters, blog for 6 years and then start a podcast. Yeah. That's what we did.
Between that and these large media corporations that have deep attachments to MSNBC and CNN. They have basically co-sponsorship of their shows. They have enormous amount of free publicity they get every day on cable news.
Good for the employees for saying, we're not going to let you hedge fund your way out of screwing us.
Exactly. No,
you're seeing millions of dollars changing hands right above us while we come to work every day. No, I am 100% behind the union negotiating this deal.
Yeah.
That's not the point, but it did make me laugh when you read that to me. And first of all, when you read the 80,000, I was like, each person is going to get that much? Each person?
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, guess how many days off? And I said, okay, 18 to 20 a year. And you said 49. I went, my God.
The article goes on to, like, other benefits and healthcare benefits and all the other things you would expect working for a business.
Right.
We all, you and I pay for out of pocket for ourselves.
We pay for that out of pocket, and we pay, I've said this many times, we pay more for health insurance than we do for our mortgage every month.
Yeah. And
that doesn't count co-pays and deductibles. That just is the premium is higher than our mortgage.
And we're going to be here on Thursday, and we're going to be here next week, and we're going to be here the week after that, because this is what we do. Yeah. But again, please understand there is a wild difference, two orders of magnitude difference between what goes on at these large corporations with the backing of Barack Obama and friends in the Senate and friends in the media business and book contracts and so on and so forth, all of which derive from their proximity to power, and us and podcasters like us, especially podcasters out in the Midwest. Liberal podcasters in the Midwest are as rare as hen's teeth. And we're the oldest ones I know of. But the entire focus of the Democratic Party is now let's talk about the middle class. Let's talk about middle America. Let's talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about manufacturing. Like, yeah, let's get the rest of the party to catch up with where we have been all along. And on top of that, a critique of the media that you're not going to find almost anywhere else that's quite accurate and goes back a good 20 years in our case.
I had an exchange with someone on Twitter about, someone had said, "You mean Tim Walz was there this whole time?" And I said, as you have said before, there are lots of Tim Walzes, but you have to land in flyover country to find them.
Right.
And someone else replied, "Well, I really try not to use the term flyover country."
Okay.
And I thought, okay, that's good. But this person who said that had their hometown in their bio, and it was Escondido, California. And I just went,
okay, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. We understand.
We live here, and we do call it flyover country because a lot of people treat us that way. Yeah.
And I understand why, as we've talked about many times before, why the New York Times, the Washington Post sent massive safaris into the interior to talk in many diners to Trump supporters, because they had no idea who these people were or what they believed. And they didn't just take 3 steps to the left and talk to the liberals who lived next door to them, who've been talking about them for decades, because they didn't want to know. They weren't interested. They're not interested in this part of the country at all.
And that's why you get, you mean Tim Walz was here this whole time?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
There's lots of blue dots in red states.
Exactly.
And there's blue cities in red states.
Exactly.
Where people care. This is the thing about the first night of the convention. It was about our values.
Yes.
It was about our Midwestern values of hard work and caring about people and caring about women who have tragic pregnancies and on and on. But people who tend bar and work in factories. You know, AOC's speech was about working people.
Well, and the woman we laid to rest yesterday or the day before, who was all those things. Yeah. And hundreds of people turned out to say farewell to her because she is exactly the sort of person that we would hope everyone wants to be. Yep. Or be near or help out or how can I help you out? And there's just a lot of that going on just below the radar. But that radar, that does not pick up on Maureen Dowd's radar ever under any circumstances. And the entire conversation gets skewed in that direction. And we have been trying for a long time, with some success, with all of your help, to skew it back the other way, to stop talking about both sides, to stop talking about both sides do it, to stop blaming Congress and Republicans do it. And again, with your help, that's been pretty successful. So keep up the good work, troops. And remember to not forget our gourmet coffee guidelines. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage for yourself, buy one for us. This isn't charity. As we've talked about almost ad nauseum, this is our job. If you can spare $5 a month, please spare $5 a month at patreon.com/ProLeftPod. And please share our show on social media. And if you love this podcast, please get someone else to listen. And thank you for doing that.
And feel free to write us at our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com, because we do love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write to us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service. Go Postal Unions! Letter on the air unless you say otherwise. Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties think that the very best way to view the Democratic National Convention is stretched out on that saggy sofa.
The saggy sofa.
Let's think about living. Think about living. Let's think about loving. Think about loving. Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional Left podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25, GGBG Productions.